To anyone looking in, we had the kind of marriage people envied. 2 kids, a nice home, steady jobs, family vacations once a year, and routines that looked solid and safe. My friends used to say I was lucky, that my husband was dependable, kind, and steady. And I knew they weren't wrong. He was never cruel, never careless with money, never unfaithful. He was good. But somewhere along the way, being good stopped feeling like enough for me. Our marriage turned into a rhythm that no longer felt like love, but like obligation. Morning coffee, school drop-offs, grocery lists. Even our conversations shrank down to logistics. What's for dinner? Did you pay the bill? Don't forget the kids' recital. I would lie awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling, wondering where the woman I used to be had gone. I wasn't vibrant anymore, wasn't passionate, wasn't alive. I was someone's wife, someone's mom, but not myself. And that gnawing emptiness grew louder every year until it drove me into choices I can't take back. I don't know when exactly it happened, but one day I realized we no longer talked. Yes, words came out of our mouths about bills, about carpools, about which of us would take the car in for service. But real conversation, the kind where you share what's inside your head or what's weighing on your chest, that was gone. I'd try sometimes. I'd sit next to him on the couch and say, "Do you ever feel like we're just going through the motions?" And he'd smile tiredly, kiss my forehead, and say, "We're doing fine. Don't overthink it." Maybe to him, fine was enough, but to me, fine felt like suffocation. Every time he brushed off my questions, I felt smaller, like my feelings were inconveniences he didn't know how to handle. I stopped trying to explain, stopped trying to reach for him, and slowly a quiet wall rose up between us. We were still in the same house, still sharing the same bed, but I felt like we lived on different planets. I told myself it was just marriage, that everyone eventually settles into silence. But deep inside, I wanted to scream. I never set out to betray him. I need to make that clear. I wasn't the type to flirt, to seek attention, to go looking for something outside of my marriage. I believed in vows, in loyalty, in being the kind of wife people could trust. But loneliness does strange things. It wears you down until you're not even sure who you are anymore. I would sit in the car after work, engine off, staring at the steering wheel, just to delay walking into a house that felt colder every year. I'd scroll endlessly through my phone, chasing some distraction, some flicker of life. And then there was him, a coworker, not particularly extraordinary, not someone I'd ever imagined myself noticing, but he listened, really listened. When I spoke, he didn't brush it aside. He asked questions. He made me feel like my thoughts mattered. It started with harmless conversations, jokes in the break room, shared complaints about long meetings. But for me, it felt like air after suffocating. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I told myself it was nothing, that I just craved attention, that it wasn't dangerous if I kept it just talking. But in my heart, I already knew I was walking a dangerous line. It didn't happen in some whirlwind of passion. It wasn't a movie scene or a moment of overwhelming lust. It was quiet, ordinary, and that's what makes it worse. We had stayed late after work, both finishing reports. The office was nearly empty. He offered to walk me to my car. I laughed at something he said, and for a second, I forgot the weight I carried at home. When he leaned closer, I didn't step back. I should have. God, I should have. The kiss was soft, tentative, like even he wasn't sure we should be doing it. And in that instant, a part of me screamed that I was destroying everything. But another part whispered, "This is what it feels like to be wanted." It didn't stop at a kiss. One bad choice became another, and suddenly, I was the person I swore I'd never be. When it was over, I sat in my car shaking, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to cry, but nothing came, just a numbness that spread through my whole body. I drove home, walked into my house, and kissed my children goodnight like nothing had changed. But everything had. I thought it would feel thrilling, that maybe I'd feel alive again after so many years of numbness. But instead, it felt like carrying a stone inside my chest. Heavy, unshakable. The next morning, I couldn't even look at him. My husband, the man who'd trusted me without ever questioning. He asked if I wanted coffee, the same way he had for years, and I nearly broke down right there in the kitchen. I told myself it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. And it didn't, not physically at least. But the secret was poison. It sat between us in every room, in every conversation, in every silence. Every time he brushed my hand, I flinched. Every time he smiled, I wanted to scream, "Don't look at me like that. I don't deserve it." But I said nothing. Nights were the worst. Lying beside him, listening to his steady breathing, I felt like a fraud. A part of me wanted to confess, to rip the bandage off and let the truth spill out. Another part of me wanted to bury it so deep it would never see daylight. I didn't know it then, but the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how hard you try to keep it buried. It happened on an ordinary evening, and maybe that's what broke me. The kids were upstairs doing homework, the dishwasher hummed softly, and we sat at the kitchen table like we had 1,000 times before. He asked me something simple, I don't even remember what, maybe about groceries, maybe about bills, but my chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I looked at him, really looked, and the weight of the secret nearly crushed me. His eyes were kind, trusting, the same eyes that had looked at me on our wedding day, through pregnancies, through sickness, through every mundane moment of our life together. And I shattered. The words came out flat, not dramatic, not angry. "There's someone else." He froze. His hands didn't move, his face didn't twist. He just stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. I wanted him to yell, to throw something, to do anything that matched the chaos inside me. But he didn't. The silence was worse than any explosion. It was the silence of something breaking in slow motion. I whispered, "It was only once. I don't know why I did it." And even as I said it, I knew it sounded like nothing but a flimsy shield against the truth. That I had betrayed him, and no excuse would ever make it less than that. He didn't shout, didn't call me names, didn't slam his fist into the table the way I secretly thought he might. Instead, he stood up, pulled his jacket from the chair, and walked out the door. The sound of it closing behind him echoed through me like a gunshot. I sat there frozen, the untouched tea between us cooling into nothing. I wanted to chase him, to beg, to throw myself at his feet and tell him I was sorry, that I was broken, that I didn't mean to ruin us. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I went upstairs and peeked into the kids' rooms. They were asleep, peaceful, unaware that their family had just cracked open. I kissed their foreheads and nearly broke apart, because I knew they would pay for my choices too. I stayed awake all night, waiting for the sound of his key turning back in the lock. When it finally came, just before dawn, I almost cried in relief. but the look on his face when he came through the door told me something had burned out inside him, something I could never bring back. The days after he came back were the hardest. He was there, physically. He made breakfast, packed lunches, kissed the kids goodbye. From the outside, we looked almost normal. But inside the house, inside us, everything had changed. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words were clipped, hollow. No anger, no warmth, just emptiness. And honestly, that scared me more than if he had screamed, because emptiness meant there was nothing left to fight for. At night, I'd watch him lying beside me. His body was there, but he felt miles away. I wanted to reach out, to take his hand, to tell him I still loved him. But the truth was, I wasn't even sure what love meant anymore. The guilt gnawed at me constantly. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. Every time I saw the kids laughing, my stomach twisted. They deserved better than the version of me who destroyed their safe little world. And yet, even through the guilt, there was a bitter truth I couldn't shake. A part of me didn't regret feeling alive again, even if it came from the worst mistake of my life. People always assume an affair is the beginning of the end. But if I'm honest, it wasn't. The end had been creeping into our marriage for years, in the sighs he didn't notice, the conversations that never went deeper than schedules, the way I felt invisible in my own home. I don't say this to excuse what I did. There is no excuse. But I need to tell it honestly. The betrayal was only the explosion. The cracks had been forming long before. I used to beg him in small ways to notice me, not with words like "I'm lonely," but in little gestures, sitting closer on the couch, asking him questions about his day, trying to tell him about mine. But every time, his answer was the same tired smile, the same, "We're fine." Fine. That word became a prison. I think that's why when someone else finally looked at me with real attention, I was too weak to resist, because I had been starving for it for years. And now, because of that weakness, I'd not only lost my husband's trust, I'd lost the chance to ever be truly seen by him again. If it weren't for the kids, I think he would have left the very night I confessed. I could see it in the way he looked at me, or rather, the way he couldn't look at me. His silence was louder than any fight could have been. But every morning, when our children came bounding into the kitchen with their messy hair and sleepy smiles, he stayed. He poured their cereal, drove them to school, asked about their projects. He never let his anger spill over onto them. And that, in some twisted way, made me love him even more and hate myself 10 times over. Because while he was holding the family together for their sake, I was the reason it was falling apart. At night, after the kids went to bed, the house would return to its unbearable quiet. We moved like strangers passing in a hallway, careful not to touch, careful not to speak more than necessary. Sometimes I'd hear him walking the floors after midnight, the creak of the boards heavy with everything he wasn't saying. And in those moments, I wondered if maybe staying together for the kids was really saving them, or just teaching them what a broken marriage looked like. I used to believe love was unshakable, that once you promised forever, it anchored you through anything. But after that night, I started questioning everything. Did he still love me, or was he just here because of the kids? Did I still love him, or did I only love the memory of who we were in the beginning? When he brushed past me in the hallway, I'd search his face for something. Anger, longing, sadness, anything that meant there was still a thread between us. But all I saw was exhaustion, like he was carrying a weight he hadn't chosen and couldn't set down. And as for me, I was torn in two. Part of me still wanted his arms around me, wanted to feel like his wife again. But another part had gone cold, convinced that no matter what we did, we could never return to who we once were. The truth I didn't want to face was this. Maybe it wasn't the affair that killed our marriage. Maybe it only revealed a love that had already died quietly, long before either of us dared to admit it. I never thought I'd picture a future without him. Not when we stood at the altar, not when we brought our children home from the hospital, not even during the years when our marriage started to fade. But after the confession, after the silence, after all the nights of lying beside a man who felt oceans away, I started to imagine what it would be like if we weren't together at all. I'd catch myself daydreaming about an apartment of my own, small, quiet, maybe messy in the corners, but mine. A space where I didn't have to tiptoe around his pain or wonder if every word I said was reopening a wound. I imagined dinners alone, just me and the kids when it was my turn, laughing without that heavy silence pressing down on us. I imagined freedom, even if it was laced with guilt. And here's the cruelest part. Sometimes those daydreams felt like relief. Not because I didn't care for him, but because I couldn't stand living in the ashes of what we used to be. And once I started picturing that life, it became harder and harder to picture us surviving this one. It wasn't some dramatic fight. No shouting, no slammed doors, no ultimatums. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had confessed months before. The kids were asleep upstairs, their laughter still echoing faintly from earlier. For a moment, it almost felt like normal life. But then he looked at me, really looked, and said quietly, "I can't do this anymore. Not like this." There was no anger in his voice, just exhaustion and a kind of grief that settled deep in my chest. I could have begged him to stay. I could have promised to fix it, to change, to fight. But the truth was, I didn't have that fight in me anymore. And I think he knew it. So I nodded. My throat burned, but I forced the words out, "Maybe it's time." We didn't call it divorce that night. We called it separating, but deep down, we both understood what that meant. And in that moment, I felt two things at once: a hollow ache that I had destroyed the life we built, and a strange, guilty relief that I no longer had to pretend we could save. The night he left, the house felt cavernous. Even with the kids sleeping in their rooms, it was as if all the walls had widened, stretching out into emptiness I couldn't fill. I lay in our bed, no, my bed now, staring at the ceiling and listening for sounds that weren't there. His footsteps, the rustle of his jacket, the quiet murmur of his voice when he read late into the night. Silence pressed against me until I thought I'd suffocate. The kids asked questions, of course. "Where's Dad staying? Why aren't you eating together?" I told them we both loved them, that none of it was their fault, that sometimes grown-ups need space. They nodded, but their eyes lingered on me, like they could sense I was breaking inside. During the day, I moved on autopilot. Work, school drop-offs, dinner, bedtime. I smiled when I needed to, but every smile felt borrowed. Every corner of the house carried memories of him, of us. And yet, in the quiet moments, there was another feeling buried deep under the grief. Relief. Relief that the pretending was over, that I no longer had to live in the ruins of a marriage we couldn't fix. But relief has a cruel edge, because it doesn't erase the guilt, it just makes it clearer that I was the one who tore it all apart. It's been months since we separated. The kids go back and forth between us now, carrying backpacks and stuffed animals like little messengers of a family that doesn't exist the way it once did. When I see him during drop-offs, we're polite, civil, Sometimes he smiles faintly, but it's the kind of smile you give a stranger you used to know well. There's no warmth left, just a quiet acknowledgement of shared history. I still replay it all in my head, the years of routine, the loneliness, the mistakes, the night I opened my mouth and shattered our world. And I wonder, if I had been braver, if I had told him sooner how unhappy I was, would we still have fallen apart? Or was this ending always waiting for us, no matter what? I don't know if he's healed, or if he ever will. I don't know if I will either. What I do know is this: I was the one who lit the match. I can try to justify it with loneliness, with cracks in the marriage, with all the ways we drifted apart. But at the end of the day, it was my choice. And choices have consequences. Now, I'm learning to live with mine, not as a wife, not as the woman I once was, but as someone who carries both the weight of regret and the faint hope that maybe, someday, I'll forgive myself enough to move forward.